Alright, now I got some random ideas for you today. Alright. Alright, sorry about that. Alright, now we got the hedge made. Alright. Alright, now we're gonna, make this like a hedge maze, made, and, maybe have them with like big scissors and, look like they have a maid dress made out of plants and, trellises and hedge maze like they're a plant. Ooh, maybe they could, be inside of, a giant hedge maze, yeah. They can be like a gardener that, sustains it, that, is made, that's, basically made to, be self-sustaining. Gotta keep those hedge mazes, up, yeah? Alright, we got the Tesserlax, yeah. Alright, this is an entity that, looks like an ugly shapen head, inside of, a box, inside of, a clear box that, is just, wireframe. And it basically is basically, it comes from, it comes from the concept of, wasted time, wasted time, basically. especially in the pursuit of, one's own pleasures, or, when they're lost, or when they're, struggling to do really anything due to, various reasons. It may not be related to just pursuing pleasure. It, could be, lots of things like, madness, or, anything else, really. or maybe stuff coming up, yeah. When they could be doing something else. Anyway, next one. We got the Cloud of Despair. This is alright, now this thing is, this thing basically looks like a smoky, dark ashen, cloud-like entity with, like a cloak of cloud. Alright, maybe it could look, feminine even. Ooh, we could use, alright now. Yeah, we could probably, reference the Cloud of Darkness from Final Fantasy, and, with its design, and, have it, be like horns, to be like sort of a fiend. It's basically an evil that's basically made from, basically depression, yeah. Since evils were basically originally, demons of madness, and, come from, dangerous and unstable minds. Well, I mean, that's not entirely accurate. I mean, that's not, completely accurate, Sometimes they just come about by, bad thoughts and bad thoughts negative thoughts that, grow too strong, or, things like depression and all that. Alright, or, from superstitions and all that. So, not really, so I guess it's not completely accurate to say that, dangerous and unstable, really. Anyway, next one. Alright, now, and we got the Midnight Tower. Alright, now. Alright, this is like a bronze, one-eyed fiend that, one-eyed fiend-like creature that, has like, bat wings and, rides around in a big ring. Yeah, and, maybe it has, time manipulation. Like, maybe it can, shift between timelines and stuff like that to, carry out evil or something. Ooh, that actually could be interesting, yeah. Imagine, Phil going back in time, to basically, do evil, to kind of, make their version of the world come true, yeah. Yeah, something like a fiend, having that kind of power, could be very dangerous, yeah. Sure, like, Calfred and, Elliot, yeah. Alright, next we got the Edgehog. Alright, this is just a giant hedgehog monster that, is gray and, has a whole bunch of blades and spikes and knives coming from its spikes. It's like super edgy too, yeah. Maybe it can even stand up on its hindquarters and, carry a switchblade. Alright, now, a switchblade made of razor blade. A serrated switchblade even. Like a mole ninja knife. I'm pretty sure it might even have a Punisher logo on it with an American flag or a thin blue line flag, yeah. Ugh, man, those are, very cringy, yeah. Yeah. I'm pretty sure, Marvel sues, the police whenever they use the Punisher logo too, yeah. And I'm pretty sure Marvel also did stories, saying why they don't like that. Anyway, that's kind of a big tangent, so I'm sorry about that. Anyway, next one. The realistic toy soldier. All right, now imagine like a life-size, plastic toy soldier, except they have, hyper-realistic weapons. Yeah, they're so realistic. It's like they're really real because they are. Oh yeah. All right, we got the butter maid. All right, now we got another maid, inspired one that is made that basically is an elemental that's made of that's basically, I guess, an elemental or a construct that's basically made of butter. Yeah, I guess its power would be butter manipulation. Yeah. Ooh, butter manipulation. I kind of like that. Yeah, I might actually use that for. Yeah, I might actually use that as a superpower, maybe. Oh, butter maid, butter maid, butter maid. That'd be perfect, perfect, perfect. All right, now we got the expire on. All right, now imagine. All right, now it's like a container of rotting it. It's like a rot container of rotting and expired stuff. Like let's say a carton of expired milk that became a sentient object spirit, and is very angry at basically being expired food that is basically neglected and left to rot. Yes, object spirits are a thing in the lore, and yes, sometimes sometimes they inhabit neglected and broken objects, and get animated by malice, and get animated by stray souls that decide to inhabit them. It's just kind of a thing that happens in the lore. One of the members of Dreams is an object spirit. Yeah, yeah. Of course, I have multiple of them, but yeah, one of the ones that I'm referencing is, the one that, is basically based on a telephone. Yeah, which basically had a little girl that basically was dying and, got their soul bound to, like an old telephone. And, got the powers of telephonesis. Trust me, it's way more powerful than you might think, yeah. All right, now, we got the next one, the pen pal, yeah. All right, now, we got another object spirit, and this one's, more of a pen. Like imagine like a humanoid entity that's basically made of pens, and has like pen arms, and like a one, and like its lower body is like one large pen. Basically it might even have like things like ink manipulation, being able to write and being able to write magic. Ooh, yeah. I like the ink manipulation. That sounds like a cool power. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. Yeah, butter and ink, huh? Alright, the next one is called Super Zero. Alright, this entity looks like the number zero, and it wears a big cape, and it has big swole arms, and it has big swole arms, and chicken like legs. It's lots of upper body strength training, and not really training its legs whatsoever. But this guy. All right, now this guy, seems like they're gonna be like a weak superhero that basically can't be destroyed, but it has the ability to multiply anything by zero. And obviously, anything that gets multiplied by zero becomes zero, basically. Yeah. Which that sounds like a pretty OP ability. Not gonna lie, I may want to find ways to try and bounce that. Since bouncing abilities is kind of I know true arts do have a high skill ceiling, and have a lot of potential, but just having one that's outright just super OP might be a little too much. Yeah. After all, I don't want to do the same mistakes that Marvel did, making characters that just bend realities, and because that kind of kind of defeats the purpose of having anything that is a problem, really. But being able to multiply things by zero, maybe there's some way to counter it. Yeah. Anyway, I'll see. All right, now. All right. Oh wow, wow, wow. Oh wow, and all right, now. Funny enough, the reason I came up with Super Zero is because, I remember back in the day when I was like in elementary school, one of the teachers was like explaining, one of the teachers I had was explaining like multiplication, and they drew the number zero as like a superhero, and they drew the number one as like a weak old man. Yeah, the reason for that is because anything multiplied by zero, becomes zero, obviously, and anything multiplied by one is basically, just as whatever number you're multiplying it by. So for example, if you have 9 times 1, the result will be 9, and anything like that, yeah. But if you multiply 9 times 0, you're basically at 0. Anyway, that's all I have to share for your food today. Remember to fly like Bat and shine like the moon, for we are self-transformative. Bye-bye now. Alright now. Alright now. How do you guys like my wings? Yeah. Alright now. My arc wings are very nice, yeah. I love you guys, Don't forget to, like and subscribe and give your name, okay? Alright now. Bye-bye now. Bye.